With coronavirus cases surging,
New cases of coronavirus are rising.
of the number of coronavirus cases.
2020년이 시작되던 올해 초, 지구촌은 뜻밖의 불청객과 맞닥뜨렸습니다. 인류가 한 번도 경험하지 못한 신종 바이러스, 바로 코로나19죠. 코로나19가 지구촌을 뒤흔든 지 1년여가 지난 지금, 인류는 이 시기를 극복하기 위해 많은 노력을 하고 있습니다. 백신이나 치료약의 개발과 더불어 우리의 익숙했던 일상 역시 적응과 변화라는 이름으로 새로운 패러다임을 구축하고 있죠. 특히 코로나19를 계기로 먼 훗날의 모습으로만 상상했던 4차 산업혁명 시대가 예상보다 빨리 다가오고 있는데요. 코로나로 인해 우리에게 보다 빨리 찾아온 이러한 상황은 인류에게 생존을 위한 더 빠르고 더 극적인 변화를 요구하고 있습니다. 코로나 시대가 부여한 인류의 핵심 과제에 대한 해결책을 찾기 위해 TV조선은 세계 각국의 유명 인사들과 학자들의 의견을 들어보는 자리를 마련했는데요. 고든 브라운 전 영국 총리, 베리 아이켄그린 UC 버클리대 교수, 매튜 메이어슨 하버드 의대 교수, 켄 골드버그 버클리대 산업공학 학과장 등 3개의 석학들이 온라인 화상회의를 통해 각각 포스트 코로나 시대의 교육, 경제, 의료, 로봇공학에 대한 열띤 토론을 펼치며 유익한 담론을 생산했습니다. 영국의 수상 자리에서 물러난 이후 유엔에서 글로벌 교육 문제 해결을 위해 노력 중인 고든 브라운 전 영국 총리는 코로나19로 인해 심화된 학습 격차 문제에 의미 깊은 화두를 던졌습니다.
I'm delighted to join you at this 8th Global Leadership Forum, and I congratulate you on choosing as this year's theme, the biggest question of our time. Now, this conference meets at the right time because we're indeed at an inflection point. COVID-19, this microscopic parasite, 10,000 times smaller than a grain of salt, has not only infected 50 million people worldwide and destroyed more than 1 million lives, but it has made us as individuals come face to face with our own vulnerability and indeed our mortality. And it has wrought more economic havoc, disrupted more trade, killed off more jobs, led to more lost production, caused more company closures than has any modern recession. But people who have been isolated know more than ever that being part of a community matters more to them than ever it did. And so each country will have to find its own way forward as it rebalances the relationships between individuals and communities, between markets and states, between risk and security, between freedom and control, between the very rich and the rest, and of course, between man and nature. And education is changing. And this is where I want to focus the rest of my remarks. Indeed, I want to suggest today that because we are now more aware than ever of inequality, of families and children denied opportunity, of the vast gap between the world's education rich and the education poor, there is now no route to the future that does not have education at its centre. No route to greater equality of opportunity that does not involve education. No route to more prosperous economies, stronger communities and fairer societies without investing in education. No route to rebuilding our countries, no route to building back better without the contribution of education, of teachers, trainers, researchers, academics to the common good. So for all these reasons, I have to say to you that the pandemic has robbed millions of children of their future. You know, at the height of the pandemic, 1.6 billion children and young people, 90% of the world's pupils and students, had their education disrupted. Nearly 1 billion students are still shut out from schools today, with the opportunities available to the world's poorest and most marginalized children already diminished and hit even more. In low-income countries today, a staggering 90% of children are in learning poverty, which means they cannot read a basic text by the age of 10, with one estimate suggesting this illiteracy could lose us as a society as much as 10 trillion in future earnings. We are standing by, doing too little, as havoc is reaped by one of the biggest forces accelerating inequality in our generation. Quality education is vital to lift people out of poverty, ensure healthier families, advance racial and gender equality, unlock job opportunities, increase security, and create a more just, peaceful and sustainable world. And girls' education is a proven link to lowering fertility rates and reducing population growth which itself is one of the key drivers of climate change. Education, especially of girls, leads to better health. A child whose mother can read is 50% more likely to live past the age of 5, 50% more likely to be immunized, twice as likely to attend school. And so this is why we must come together as a global community and save the future of our children. In response to this crisis, the Education Commission, in partnership with an unprecedented global coalition of international organizations, launched Save Our Future to call for urgent investigation in education to prevent what we call a generational catastrophe. 3 actions are urgently needed. First, we must reopen schools, but make sure they are safe schools. Second, we must prevent what the World Bank and UNESCO estimate could be a funding gap of 200 billion in education budgets in the next year, as countries reallocate resources to health and social welfare. And third, to use available resources to greatest effect, we must be innovative, like creating the International Finance Facility for Education, securing $500 million of grants and government guarantees that could unlock $2 billion of educational investment to be made through the Asian Development Bank and other development banks. And I urge the Korean government to join IFID as a funding donor. And we must use this crisis as an opportunity to transform education. Think of the educational revolution we need as we meet the demand for ever-changing skills, continuous learning, and try to harness technology to support those most left behind. A study published just last year revealed how disparities in learning achievements have not diminished over the last 50 years. The most disadvantaged still perform at levels that are 3 to 4 years behind the most affluent. And we must change this. Online learning became a necessity almost overnight, but yet close to half of the world's pupils and students don't have access to the internet. Across the world, more than 460 million, or almost 1/3 of school-aged children, had not been reached by remote learning at all. So this could be the moment for us to transform education, to create individualized, adaptive learning, meeting children where they are, with personalized learning at scale for every student, not just the lucky few. This is why the Education Commission and its hub in Asia, under the leadership of Joho Lee, are spearheading the high-tech, high-touch for all initiative, combining the power of human touch and interaction from teachers with the power of adaptive learning and technologies such as artificial intelligence. The high-tech refers to an adaptive technology that can help deliver personalized learning. It identifies prior knowledge and tailors instruction to diverse learning needs, allowing students to be stimulated and nurtured as they progress at their own pace. This can also be done initially in low-tech ways, but artificial intelligence that can allow us to track a child's experience with software-informed data and gear every child's learning to their aptitude is one way forward. The high-touch element is the indispensable human connection provided by teachers. With the use of high-tech, teachers can give more personalized guidance. No longer just the lecturer who's the sage on the stage, but also the tutor and mentor who is the guide by the side. We've already seen the promise of this approach in Asia, in Vietnam, as well as in India. Here in Korea, the HTHT University Consortium, which includes 16 member institutions, provides support to Korean universities that use the HTHT approach in their curricula. And the K-12 Consortium targets low-income students across multiple cities. I'm glad to announce the launch of HTHT for All, a global consortium across governments, edtech innovators, industry providers and educators that will develop a rigorous evidence base and create a collaborative network to support bold ways to address the digital divide. So let us be the first generation where every child not only goes to school and learns, but feels able to bridge the gap between what they are and what they have it in themselves to become. And let us be the first generation where instead of developing only some of the talents of some of our children in some of the world's countries, we develop all of the talents of all children in all countries. Thank you very much.
이번 포럼에서 고든 브라운 전 총리가 언급한 하이터치 하이테크 교육은 수천 년간 이어온 기존의 대면 수업을 송두리째 바꿔놓을 수 있는 획기적인 변화의 출발점이 될 수도 있습니다.
그 하이터치 하이텍의 개념은 일단 이제 하이텍은 AI가 지원하는 소프트웨어를 가지고 공부를 하는 겁니다. 그래서 그렇게 하면은 교사분들이 훨씬 더 부담을 덜기 때문에 교사분들은 대신에 훨씬 더 인간적인 하이터치 쪽으로 이제 갈 수 있는 거죠. 그래서 하이터치와 하이텍이 결합되면 기존에 할 수 없었던 많은 새로운 교육 방식이 도입이 되는 것입니다.
실제 도입이 되었을 때는 비대면 교육도 선생님들이 사실 인간의 인내심, 인간의 추론 능력, 인간의 예측 능력, 그리고 이런 것들을 인간의 동기부여 능력보다 훨씬 뛰어난 수준의 AI가 학생들에게 최적의 컨텐츠를 최적의 시각에 추론을 해줄 수 있고 추천을 해줄 수 있고 이런 식으로 이제 AI가 더 발전을 하게 되면 비대면 교육 현장의 교육의 질이 지금 우리가 2019년도까지 겪었었던 오프라인 교육 현장의 교육의 질보다 저는 훨씬 더 높아질 거라고 예상하고 있습니다.
그리고 이러한 하이터치, 하이테크 학습 프로그램 분야에서 두각을 나타내고 있는 곳이 바로 우리 한국의 작은 기업들입니다. 고든 브라운 전 총리가 한국과 컨소시엄을 제안한 것도 바로 이런 맥락에서였는데요.
이번 그 글로벌 리더스 포럼이 사실 뭐 우리나라에서 많은 그런 글로벌 포럼을 하지만 주로 외국 걸 받아들이는 포럼이잖아요. 근데 우리가 이번에는 우리의 경험, 우리의 아이디어를 외국으로 해외로 제안하는 오히려 이제 역으로 이제 된 거죠. 굉장히 큰 의미가 있다고 생각하고요. 그 이야기를 글로벌 교육의 가장 이제 대표격인 고든 브라운 전 총리의 입에서 그 제안이 나왔고 또 거기 서울에서 글로벌 리더스 포럼에서 했다는 것은 굉장히 큰 의미가 있다고 생각합니다.
하이터치 하이테크 교육이란 선생님으로부터 일방적인 지식 전달 방식이 아닌 빅데이터를 기반으로 한 AI 맞춤형 교육 방법입니다. AI는 학생에 대한 다양한 정보를 수집하고 저장합니다. 학생의 부족한 점이 무엇인지 파악하는 것은 물론이고 학생의 학습 능력과 수준까지 분석하여 학생에게 딱 맞는 맞춤형 공부 솔루션을 제공할 수 있습니다.
내가 매 문제를 풀 때마다 그 다음에 어떤 학습을 해야 될지가 그러니까 적응형으로 이제 개인화되어 추천을 해주게 됩니다. 근데 그 과정에서 지속적인 진단과 그리고 컨텐츠를 추천해주는 어떤 특정 주기가 이제 우리가 기존에 알고 있었던 맞춤형 교육의 어떤 그 프리퀀시 그 주기보다는 훨씬 짧은 주기로 이제 그 반응형으로 이제 예측을 하고 추천을 해준다는 방식에서 좀 많이 다른 것 같습니다.
편리한 첨단 기술에 첨단 기술이 갖지 못하는 감성을 불어넣는 하이터치 하이테크 기술. 이것이 교육 분야에 적용되는 시대의 학교와 선생님, 그리고 학생의 모습은 어떤 모습일까요?
Happy morning, guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today is Tuesday. It's gonna be a very busy day here in Berlin, and I feel like I finally adjusted to the city.
러시아 학생 디나라가 자신의 유튜브 채널에 올린 영상의 일부입니다. 언뜻 보면 베를린을 여행 중인 평범한 학생 같아 보이지만 사실 디나라는 여행이 아닌 수업에 참여 중입니다. 디나라가 베를린에서 다니는 곳곳과 만나는 사람들은 모두 그의 교실이자 선생님입니다. 디나라는 세계 각국에서 혁신대학으로 주목받는 미국의 미네르바 스쿨 학생입니다. 이 학교의 가장 큰 특징은 강의실이 없다는 점인데요. 학생들은 대학 생활 4년 동안 7개 국가를 돌며 기숙사 생활을 하게 됩니다. 이 시스템의 목적은 방과 후 학생이 있는 해당 국가에서 그 나라 기업체의 인턴 과정이라든지 그 나라에서만 할 수 있는 실무 경험을 쌓는 것이 핵심입니다. 100% 온라인으로 진행되는 모든 수업에서 교수는 실시간으로 학생들과 의견을 나누며 즉각적인 피드백을 하고 수업 참여가 저조해 빨간색으로 표시된 학생에게는 추가 질문을 던지기도 합니다. 2014년부터 시작된 미네르바 대학의 캠퍼스 없는 쌍방향 원격 수업 방식은 언택트 시대가 된 지금 미래교육으로 각광받고 있는데요. 이 학교의 창립자 벤 넬슨, 그가 기대하는 교육의 미래는 어떤 모습일까요?
And thank you so much for having me with you today. Normally, I would be in Seoul. I usually come to South Korea about 3 or 4 times a year. And so it's particularly difficult for me to be here in San Francisco because of the pandemic, but I hope that soon we'll be able to be together in perhaps next year's forum. I wanted to layer on top of that view and provide a bit of a parallel history and what it means for artificial intelligence as we move forward. Well, if you were to think about the universities that were initially established in Europe, and this is going back to the University of Bologna, and especially this was in Italy, that was beginning to develop an idea of a middle class, a profession. And they wanted to acquire knowledge, which was incredibly difficult to get back then. And these students decided that they would go out and hire teachers to teach them. But very quickly, the European model evolved away from student-driven models, even the University of Bologna itself. And instead, it served the needs of two institutions. The first institution was the monarchy, with the king and queen, because they realized that they needed knowledge to certain members of society so that they could serve the needs of the king and queen better. The second model was the ones that was the institutions that served the church, because the church also wanted to train priests in order to be able to continue to grow and influence various populations. But institutions like the University of Pennsylvania, University of Virginia, and others, some started before the Revolutionary War in the United States, some after, realized that they wanted to create a new society. A society where human beings didn't exist in order to serve a king or a queen, but they themselves were free or had liberty. And they realized they needed a different kind of education, because one day a citizen may be a shopkeeper, but the next day that same citizen may become a judge. Or one day a citizen may be a doctor, and the next they may be a senator or a president. They called this education the liberal arts, modeled after a previous republic, the Roman Republic. Today, that idea of a liberal arts education still exists in the center of American universities. It also, by the way, exists in the center of Korean universities. But the reality is that universities have devolved much more to the subject matter, information-driven European model. And that presents an interesting challenge. If the role of the university is to spread information, well, the machine, turns out, can do that far better than a human. But education should go beyond the dissemination of information. It should explore not just black and white, true and untrue, but black and gray. And the future of education, at least in the short term, and by short term I mean in the coming decade, 2 decades or so, is by taking the best of both worlds. How do you do that? The first category is indeed the acquisition of knowledge, of a fact basis that's tailored to the learning style and capabilities of that particular student. But the second version is that black and gray area that I was talking about before. That area is about novel applications, taking information, concepts, skills, tools that you learn to apply in theory, but then struggling with how to think about them in various scenarios, in contexts that are new and unclear. And then lastly, there is the experiential application of knowledge. And yes, you can create simulations and other kinds of programming to let students go through a process, but far better than that is to actually go into the real world and apply what you learn in the chaos of what you're surrounded by, being impacted by culture, by context, by variability, by serendipity. And so, if you think about education and artificial intelligence, I believe you'll see a spectrum. The dissemination of knowledge, the acquisition of core information, or even skills, an area where technology can and should play the dominant role. If you think about artificial intelligence as a replacement for human beings, you'll miss the key areas where technology can bridge to a better form of education. And we believe that that is going to be the dominant modality of education in the coming decades. Thank you for your time.
2002년 개봉한 영화 마이너리티 리포트의 한 장면입니다. 당시 관객들에게 미래 사회의 모습을 보여주며 많은 인기와 화제를 불러일으켰죠. 영화 속 장면 중에는 이미 현실화되어 우리 일상에 자리 잡은 기술들이 있습니다. 그중 대표적인 것이 바로 이 장면, 손으로 아이콘을 실행하고 조작하는 터치스크린 기술입니다. 현재 터치스크린으로 스마트폰에 어플리케이션을 실행하고 삭제하는 일은 이젠 너무나 당연한 일상이 되었죠. 마이너리티 리포트 영화에 등장하는 가장 중요한 기술은 따로 있습니다. 빅데이터를 이용해 범죄를 예측하고 잠재적 범죄자를 찾아내는 프리크라임 기술이죠. 주인공인 탐 크루즈는 이 프리크라임 기술을 이용해 범죄를 사전에 예방할 수 있었습니다. 영화에 등장했던 이러한 상상력을 의료 영역으로 확장한 이들이 있습니다. 아직 존재하지 않은 범죄자를 빅데이터를 이용해 추적했던 탐 크루즈처럼 이들은 아직 존재하지 않은 암세포를 미리 찾아 암 발생을 예측해 사전에 방지하고자 합니다.
정밀의료는 그러니까 사람이 서로 다르다는 사실을 전제로 그 사람의 서로 다름을 이용하는 건데요. 특히 사람이 체질적으로 유전자가 얼마나 다른지 또 서로 처해 있는 환경이 얼마나 다른지를 감안해서 그 차이를 이용해서 질병을 예측하고 예방하고 진단하고 치료하는 의학의 한 분야를 정밀의학이라고 합니다.
지난 2013년 할리우드 스타 안젤리나 졸리가 받은 유방 절제 수술이 화제가 됐었는데요. 이에 대해 안젤리나 졸리는 암투병 끝에 돌아가신 어머니와 똑같은 상황을 겪고 싶지 않다고 밝혔습니다. 이 소식이 큰 화제를 불러일으켰던 이유는 그가 유방암을 실제로 앓고 있지 않았다는 점에 있습니다.
유방암에 잘 걸리는 위험 유전자를 가지고 있는데 그런다고 모든 사람이 유방암에 걸린 건 아니거든요. 의사의 말로는 당신은 한 80% 확률로 유방암에 걸릴 수 있다. 안 걸릴 수도 있고 걸릴 수도 있다. 걸릴 확률은 약 80%다. 유방을 절제하고 나면 그 확률이 어떻게 되냐? 5%로 줄어든다. 하지만 여전히 그러니까 즉 걸릴 수도 있다는 거죠. 유방 절제 수술을 하지 않아도 안 걸릴 수 있고 절제 수술을 해도 걸릴 수 있는데 다만 당신이 걸릴 확률을 80%에서 5%로 떨어뜨릴 수 있다. 과연 유방 절제 수술을 할 것인가? 라는 그런 어려운 결정을 던졌을 때 안젤리나 졸리는 또 용감하게 절제 수술을 하겠다라고 선언했고요.
졸리는 어머니로부터 유방암 관련 유전자를 물려받았는데 이로 인해 유방암에 걸릴 확률이 87%에 달했던 것으로 전해졌습니다. 유방 절제술을 받은 후 확률은 5%로 떨어졌다고 하는데요. 이처럼 유전자 데이터를 활용한 정밀 의료 기술은 암을 예방하고 조기 치료하는 암 정복의 시대를 앞당기고 있습니다.
And good afternoon from my end. It's a real honor to be able to give this lecture in Seoul, Korea, by the magic of modern telecommunications. The outline of the talk is first, what happens to the genome in cancer? Second, lung cancer and genomes. What is the impact of precision medicine? First, why do we care about cancer-causing genes? We want to treat cancer by blocking the activity of cancer-causing genes. This has worked for many diseases. For example, imatinib can treat chronic myeloid leukemia with ABL activation. Trastuzumab can treat breast cancer with ERBB2 activation. And erlotinib and gefitinib can treat lung cancer with EGFR activation. Our genome is made of 6 billion DNA letters. 3 billion come from our mother. 3 billion come from her father. They're organized in 46 chromosome strings, and they include around 20,000 genes. How is the cancer genome different from a normal cell genome? Almost all of the cells in our body have the same DNA, but the DNA of cancer cells is different from the normal cells in the same person. It's mutated. A mutation means a change in DNA sequence or structure, and it implies some functional significance. The genomes of cancer cells continue to change as the disease gets more severe or as patients become resistant to drugs. There are two types of cancer therapies that are specific for the genome. Targeted therapies kill cancer cells that have unique genome alterations and that require those alterations to survive. Immunotherapies kill cancer cells with unique neoantigens, changes in their expressed protein, and they do so by immune recognition of these changes. When we think about lung cancer genomes and therapies, then we have very specific changes in those genomes that have led to the development of important new therapies. Now, with the knowledge of genomics and immunology, and the rapid development of targeted therapies and immunotherapies, the situation for lung cancer treatment and survival is improving. We made an early discovery in our laboratory of EGFR mutants in lung cancer. We looked at the DNA sequence of the receptor tyrosine kinase genes, one family of genes, in lung cancers from patients in the United States and Japan. We found somatic mutations in the cancer, but not in the rest of the body, in the EGFR gene in lung adenocarcinoma. Work led by Guillermo Paez, published in the journal Science in the year 2004. With all of these mutations in lung cancer, one of the really interesting findings was the discovery of RET mutations, RET translocations, a rearrangement between the KIF5B gene and the RET gene. Work done at Seoul National University here in Seoul, led by Young-Suk Ju and Jong-Sun So, published in Genome Research. With this work on the lung cancer genome, you can see that only 6 drugs were approved for lung cancer from 1960 to 2000. But since 2000, there are many drugs approved every year, including 4 so far this year alone, including the pralsetinib and selpercatinib that I mentioned. What does this mean for lung cancer patients overall? A study from the National Cancer Institute in the United States, led by Howadler and colleagues, showed both for men and women a steady decrease in lung cancer mortality, but a huge increase in that decrease. The decrease got bigger, so we've seen a big increase in lung cancer survival, thanks to new therapies, including targeted therapies like EGFR and RET inhibitors, and also immunotherapies. Alterations in many genes cause lung cancer. Many of these genes, including EGFR and RET and others, can now be targeted with new drugs. These new targeted treatments improve lung cancer survival. Genome diagnosis and targeted therapy are the wave of the future for lung cancer. Thank you very much for your attention to this presentation, and I now look forward to the last part, which is discussion of the presentation. It's an honor again to be here through the miracle of modern technology with you in Seoul, Korea, and I hope that one day, through two other miracles, vaccination and treatment for the coronavirus and the miracle of air travel, that I can be with you in person. Thank you, and good night.
올해는 로봇이라는 용어가 세상에 나온 지 딱 100년이 되는 해입니다. 예전에는 산업 현장에서 사용하는 산업용 로봇이 주류를 이루었고 그 뒤를 이어 서비스 로봇으로 교육용과 청소 로봇 정도가 활용되었죠. 그러나 IT와 AI 기술이 발전하면서 로봇의 활용 분야가 넓어지기 시작했습니다.
These days, we can see many robotics companies every day. Robotics is booming because it is our future.
여기에 코로나19 팬데믹은 로봇 산업의 급격한 발전을 불러오는 도화선 역할을 하고 있습니다.
So we think the world is very much adapting to robots to increase the quality of life, to increase our flexibility, to empower people to get food, a cleaner world, economic growth, and sustainability.
이러한 분위기로 인해 최근 발빠르게 변화하고 있는 대표적인 곳이 바로 의료, 구조, 식당, 상품 배송과 같은 분야인데요.
Interaction, a new welcoming of robots because robots are safe, so they can replace human contact. In many environments, for example, in hospitals, in airports, they're being used to manage supplies that might need to be protected. They're also being used to provide a certain degree of companionship.
알파고가 인간을 멀찌감치 따돌린 지 4년여가 지난 지금 우리는 식당, 쇼핑몰에서 만나는 주문 로봇에 익숙해져 있습니다. 여기에 비대면 활동이 일상화되면서 새로운 로봇 시대가 열리고 있는데요. 인간과 로봇의 공존 시대, 여러분은 이러한 세상에 적응할 준비가 되어 있으신가요?
It's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I think it's very constructive and less about fear and more about possibility. So let me start by saying that the incredible change that has happened in the last 9 months to our society is something that we didn't anticipate, but it's been incredibly powerful. And we are responding in every way we know possible, but it's been fascinating that our best technologies have been somewhat limited against this very natural force of nature. Now, it has caused a lot of shifts in the way we interact with robots. It caused a new interaction, a new welcoming of robots because robots are safe, so they can replace human contact. In many environments, for example, in hospitals, in airports, they're being used to manage supplies that might need to be protected. Robots are also finding new uses for disinfecting, and these are a class of robots that are being used to apply ultraviolet light to cleanse areas, to disinfect certain areas from the virus. This is also being done outdoors. So there are new spraying robots that can spray areas to treat them. And such robots are ground-based and air-based. So there's a whole range of robotic applications, including a new excitement about delivery robots. This was something that was being explored a little bit a year ago, but now has really had a resurgence because there's a need for people to have safe delivery of food and medical goods on short notice. The challenge is on the other side, which is obtaining the goods, the deliveries that have been ordered, meeting that demand. And that's become increasingly difficult because the need to protect the workers in warehouses. They can't be put in very close proximity because of the danger of catching an infection. So there's an enormous drive to find a solution, basically to be able to meet this huge surge in demand for e-commerce. And the natural question is, can robots help? So the challenge is that right now, almost all of the stocking of merchandise, putting things into boxes to fulfill orders, is done almost entirely by humans. And so the grand challenge is, can we develop robots that have the manual dexterity to be able to pick up arbitrary objects and pack them into orders? And if we can do this, it would have enormous impact in factories, warehouses, and homes. So here's the system running in our laboratory, and it's got two end effectors, one gripper and one suction cup. And it's deciding at every moment, as it's looking down with the camera, which of those two end effectors to use, which has most probability of success. And it's able to routinely clear out bins like you see here. Now, let me come to artificial intelligence and the theme of what Dr. Kim described as robotics, humans, and tasks, because I want to make a point about what I see as a misunderstanding about artificial intelligence. Because we know that AI is superior to humans in certain respects. It's much better at doing calculations, at precision, and objectivity, no doubt. And on the other hand, humans are far superior in terms of understanding and empathy and manual dexterity, the ability to pick up arbitrary objects. So our skill sets are complementary. It's not a matter of us versus the machine, but it's a way of us working with machines in new ways. And so what I want to emphasize is that there's a real opportunity to have artificial intelligence combined with intelligence amplification, the ability to amplify our own very human intelligence and abilities. Now, this has been shown more recently in the context of human groups, the idea of collective IQ, that groups that are diverse, that involve people who are different and bring different viewpoints to the table, will almost uniformly come up with better solutions and more innovative ideas. And it's because everyone thinks in different ways. Everyone at this conference, everyone listening, has slightly different skills and talents. Some are good at music, some are good at art, some are good at programming. And all those combinations is really what is essential to making progress and solving problems and innovating. So coming back to the virus, it has been a catalyst. It has changed and accelerated a pattern that we were moving towards slowly, but it is now, we have moved much further, much quicker. So although it's caused enormous suffering, I do see enormous potential that it can lead us to new understandings and bring us closer to complementarity. And again, it's not this vision here that the robots are coming to take over, that they're going to wipe out our jobs and they're going to replace us. I don't believe that, and I don't think any of my fellow roboticists feel that way. But what they will do is open up new opportunities for us to work together in new groups with machines and to address problems in new ways. So I want to thank some of the sponsors I've been fortunate to work with, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
전 세계를 혼란으로 몰아넣은 코로나는 국제사회에서 국가들 간의 관계에도 적지 않은 영향을 끼쳤습니다. 코로나 발원지에 대한 치열한 공방전이 있었고 방역이라는 이름으로 각국은 서로의 문을 걸어 잠그기도 했죠. 백신의 개발과 확보를 위한 여러 나라의 치열한 경쟁 역시 코로나19가 만들어낸 국제관계의 한 단면입니다. 이러한 와중에 터진 미국과 중국의 무역 분쟁은 코로나로 인해 불확실해진 세계 경제의 또 하나의 불안 요소로 등장했습니다. 미국은 중국산 수입품에 25% 관세를 부과했고 중국 역시 물러서지 않고 미국 제품에 보복성 관세를 부과했죠. 우리의 안보와 경제에 직간접적으로 가장 긴밀하게 연관되어 있는 미국과 중국의 새로운 대결 구도는 우리에게도 매우 중요한 문제로 다가올 수밖에 없습니다. 더군다나 우리의 주변 강대국인 미국과 일본에선 새로운 리더십까지 들어선 상황입니다.
Biden will take a less isolationist, more multilateral approach to foreign policy.
특히나 한반도는 지정학적으로 강대국들 간의 이해관계가 첨예하게 부딪히는 동북아, 그 중에서도 가장 중심에 위치해 있습니다. 이러한 상황에서 우리의 정책 방향성에 대한 깊은 고민과 올바른 결정을 내리는 것이 무엇보다 중요한 일일 텐데요. 격변하는 세계 정세 속에서 우리는 어떤 국가 전략을 짜야 할까요? 이에 대해 국제정세 전문가들은 어떤 생각을 가지고 있을까요?
Yes, well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here virtually and address this forum. So let me talk about the new U.S. political figuration in the wake of the election. I think that's the most likely outcome. Just to remind you of what that means, it means a small Democratic majority in the House and a razor-thin Republican majority in the Senate, okay? It means Biden will face very strong pressures to nominate centrist judges and cabinet officials and other leading officials, because those people have to be approved by the Senate. And he's gonna wanna get his government up and running. So this will give him, very strong incentive to do that. Something else that happened under President Obama, which I'm not a fan of, is to use international agreements not endorsed by Congress in an effort to commit the United States to policy goals that don't command a political majority in the United States. That's my view of the Paris Climate Accord. And regardless of whether or not you think the Paris Climate Accord policies are a good idea, it was something that President Obama entered into without congressional endorsement because there wasn't a political majority. I don't know whether President Biden will pursue that approach as aggressively as President Obama did. I hope not. Now, in terms of outlook for domestic policies, and remember, I'm thinking of the divided government scenario, I think there's going to be only modest U.S. fiscal support in late 2020 or early 2021, under $1 trillion. And the only thing that would really, in my view, alter that is if both the pandemic worsened from where it already is and the economic fallout worsened dramatically. What I expect instead to see is some modest support, additional support for unemployed workers, modest aid to state and local governments, and there's probably going to be some bipartisan agreement about funding the pandemic response. Large tax hikes, no, that's not going to pass a divided government. Modest tax hikes after the pandemic's over, possibly. Legislation to kill or greatly restrain the fossil fuel industry, which is what some of the left-wing elements of the Democratic Party would like to see. No, I don't think that's going to happen. The Fed itself, by its own assessment, expects to see near zero policy interest rates until the end of 2023. What does that mean for South Korea and the rest of the world? It means pressure for low interest rates for a long time. And that's what I expect to see on that front. Now, on the international front, I agree with Professor Eichengreen. There's going to be a lot more rhetoric about international cooperation. There'll certainly be much friendly relations between most leaders and most traditional allies. I'm not sure what the Biden administration's stance will be towards the WTO. There's a lot of anti-trade sentiment in both the Democratic and the Republican Party. So I think it's going to be hard for President Biden to move to an aggressively pro-trade policy stance. Now, there are many policy frictions between the United States and China. I don't see those diminishing. I'm not sure what the most important flashpoints will be, but I do anticipate continued difficulties and tensions in the U.S.-China relationship going forward. And in this regard, I think there really was you can regard it as an accomplishment or not by President Trump. And I didn't like many of his policy actions with respect to trade, especially early in his administration. But there's no doubt that he played an instrumental role in shifting the U.S. political discussion about China. And that's true both now among Democrats and Republicans. So in my remaining time, I just want to talk a little bit about U.S. labor market developments, and I'll draw a couple parallels to South Korea as I do it. So here's an overall picture of the evolution of the health of the U.S. labor market. In recent decades, I picked here the employment rate among prime-age persons 25 to 54. You can see it was rising pretty steadily in the United States by a few percentage points since 2014. And then it plummeted quite dramatically in reaction to the pandemic, and it's come about halfway back. The story in South Korea is different, a much smaller drop. We've done a much better job of containing the pandemic and its economic fallout, but not much recovery. Now, the other even bigger shift in US labor markets is the nature of working arrangements. We now have 90% of our employees working from home. There's no way I would have tried that experiment before the COVID-19 pandemic. It would have been too risky, it would have been foolish. But we, as a society in the United States, undertook this massive compulsory experiment in working from home at the individual level, at the organizational level, and at the societal level. And research I've been doing suggests that a big part of that will stick. Now, as I tell you all this, and you might be saying, okay, that might happen in the United States, but it's not going to happen in South Korea. That's just not our practice. Let me say why I think that's only partly true. It's partly true because South Korea, because it had a much more successful effort thus far to contain the pandemic, it didn't disrupt working arrangements and economic practices, business practices, and so on, nearly to the same extent as happened in the United States. So in the US, all these investments that we've made as individuals, as organizations, to make working from home, the things we've learned about how it works, when it doesn't work, all of that accumulated knowledge will make things stick more in the United States than in South Korea. The stigma of working from home is also diminished much more in the United States than in South Korea. But there's some things that are happening that are probably going to gradually diffuse globally. Platforms, the technologies, the tools, the apps that we have that support working from home and other forms of remote interactivity, those things are going to get better and better over the next few years. And as they get better, working from home will become more attractive, not just in the United States, but globally. And that's going to have profound impacts for how the labor market works and for how societies are organized, for how cities are organized, and more. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
코로나19로 수많은 사람이 고통을 받고 극도의 사회 불안이 전 세계를 뒤흔들고 있습니다. 하지만 인류는 자연으로부터 살아남는 법을 시작으로 수많은 질병과 전쟁, 자연재해를 극복하며 지금의 찬란한 현대 문명을 이뤄냈습니다. 이번에도 우리는 늘 그랬던 것처럼 코로나19를 현명하게 극복해낼 수 있을 겁니다. 이제 우리가 해야 할 것은 코로나 이후 우리의 세계와 삶을 어떻게 만들어가야 할지에 대한 고민 아닐까요?